600 years ago, the great Chinese Admiral Zheng He visited Malacca. He brought with him 300 ships, something like 35,000 troops, an armada that could easily have conquered the region if his heart had been set on that course. But Zheng had come not to invade by force of arms, but to extend the hand of friendship. 100 years later, the Portuguese came with 800 troops and only around a dozen ships and conquered Malacca for the next 130 years. But we don't like to talk about that. Today, China is our partner. The United States is also a partner. And this evening, I say clearly to our friends from America, from China, from Russia, India, and beyond, we in ASEAN share your values and your aspirations, and we urge you, work with us. It is not about taking sides. We must replace the old bilateralism of the Cold War, not with a new bilateralism, but a multilateralism that can rise to the task ahead. Because war between nations is no longer the greatest threat scenario in the region or the world. Instead, we face a new set of asymmetric and non-traditional security challenges. Human trafficking, terrorism, drug smuggling, nuclear proliferation cannot be resolved in isolation or through the old security structures of the past. We in ASEAN know this, which is why we have in place a range of security structures, not just one. Intra-ASEAN trade is now valued at around $1 trillion. Linking our economies together in this way is in itself a means of actively reducing the possibility of conflict. And trade and investment are important building blocks. Building blocks towards peace. After all, why would you wage war on your biggest market? But as our economies come together, so do our people. New communications technologies and the advent of low-cost airlines are breaking down borders, allowing more people to integrate with their near and not so near neighbors. In my country, Malaysia, integrating many cultures, many tongues, many religions is simply what we do. It is what we have done for more than half a century since independence. And out of that unity comes stability, security, and peace. My own heritage lies with an ethnic group called the Bugis. Our family tree has many branches wrapped around the islands and peninsulas of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, a geographical spread that came about in part because of our passion for seafaring and exploration, but also because of the way we conducted ourselves once we arrived in a new land. Throughout history, races and peoples have sought out new territory through conquest and oppression. But the Bugis have always taken a different approach. Falsafah Tiga Hujung, or the philosophy of the three tips. The first is Hujung Lidah. The second is Hujung Anutu, which I won't translate. The third is Hujung Keris. It is one that I believe still resonates today. Physical conflict, invasion, violence, war was always the most desperate last resort. Long before taking up arms, the Bugis would first use diplomacy. That's the Ujung Lidah. They would talk to their neighbors, get to know them, try to come to a mutually acceptable conclusion. The next step involved integration, strengthening bonds between the Bugis and the other parties through friendship and family. Sometimes this would literally involve marriage. That's not quite what I'm proposing today. For one thing, I already have a lovely wife. But in our globalized economy, the financial relationships between countries bind us together almost as closely as wedding vows. Today, for example, the same waters that my ancestors crossed 1,000 years ago and that Cheng sailed back in the 15th century are some of the most important trade routes in the world. Every year, almost 100,000 ships travel down the Straits of Malacca, and more than a quarter of the world's traded goods pass through the South China Sea. So if transportation links are the lifeblood of international trade, Southeast Asia has become its beating heart, and we have a collective responsibility to ensure businesses can operate here in safety and security. That is why Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia are already working trilaterally through the Eye in the Sky initiative to combat the menace of piracy in the Straits of Malacca, an effective response in comparison to the escalating situation in the Horn of Africa. But the areas where we need to work together are not confined to trade. Post-September 11, we're facing a new and uncharted security landscape with multiple threat scenarios. We must meet those challenges comprehensively, with resolve and decisiveness, and with no option off the table. We need to start with every nation playing their part in securing their own internal borders, and this must be followed by willingness to work together on a bilateral and multilateral basis. Malaysia has and will continue to play its role as a responsible global citizen. And we have shown and will continue to show that our commitment is not merely rhetorical, but is backed by action. In working to secure world peace, Malaysian peacekeepers have served under the umbrella of both the United Nations and NATO, and from Somalia to the Balkans, Malaysian security personnel have made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of global stability. But ours is not simply a peacekeeping role. Malaysia contributes in many ways, sometimes rather unexpected ways. For example, in Afghanistan, where we are playing our part in the country's rehabilitation by sending much-needed female Muslim doctors. In the fight against global terrorism, we've also been an active player, proactive in ensuring Malaysia becomes neither a hotbed nor a transit point for terrorist operations, and either actively or through the sharing of intelligence with regional security apparatus, we have helped with the apprehension or elimination of terrorists like Mat Slamat, Dr. Azahari, and Nordin Mattop. In the southern Philippines, Malaysia has put in an international monitoring team and acted as an intermediary by hosting peace talks between the Philippines government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. This has at times been a sensitive issue for us, but we are committed to taking the lead in the interest of wider stability and peace. And in southern Thailand, we have signaled our willingness to help with the socio-economic development of the 4 provinces with substantial Muslim populations. Bilaterally, we are working with the United States to combat crimes like drug trafficking, terrorism, and fraud, and with Australia to tackle the issue of asylum seekers and to foster stability right across our region. Multilaterally, we are working to enforce the United Nations Security Council resolution on the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction through our new Strategic Trade Act. I am determined that we will play our part as a responsible member of the international and regional community, and that in the spirit of the 1995 Declaration, we will together make ASEAN a nuclear-free zone. We simply cannot allow our important work together to be derailed by tensions or destabilized by disagreements and disputes. And with Thailand and Cambodia currently at The Hague, our region knows only too well how deadly such clashes can be. In this case, there is, of course, the good and bad news. The bad news is that 16 people lost their lives. The good news is that both sides are now talking. And I think we all have high hopes for an imminent resolution. Of course, difficulties between neighbors will flare up from time to time. But in our region, significant progress has, in fact, been made in settling some of these disputes over the years. China and Russia were able to resolve the land border at 4,300 kilometers, the longest in the world, in 2008. Vietnam and China completed their land border demarcation in that same year.